This is the Old West Element 2, Part 2, about the mining and ranching industries that took place in the 1800s around the time of the Civil War and thereafter. Now, the first thing to understand is that the ranching and mining industries both benefited from the conquest of Native Americans and railroad expansion. This especially held true in the gold rush of 1849, which happened near Sutter's Mill, California. Now, the 1849 gold rush taking place this close to San Francisco is what eventually spurned the football team there, the San Francisco 49ers, with their gold helmets and gold pants, to be called the 49ers. It's a very famous part of the region. Thousands of people, once gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill, and many of the people being lawless men and virtueless women, came to California almost overnight. The region was completely overwhelmed, and local government was also deluged with robbery, claim jumping, and murder. Now, the majority of settled Californians were law-abiding, even if they did participate in the gold rush that took place there. They appealed for statehood to have federal involvement and stronger state government to try to deal with all the crime that was being brought about by the gold rush. Eventually, this led to the Compromise of 1850. More on that later when we talk about the politics of slavery. Other mining regions were also starting to boom during this time as well. The 59ers of Pikes Peak, Colorado and Mount Davidson, Utah, in 1859 found some success. Most at Pikes Peak didn't do well, but enough did for a gold rush to occur and have people believe that there was plenty of gold in them thar hills. But while Pikes Peak and Mount Davidson weren't necessarily, or Pikes Peak anyway, wasn't necessarily successful, the Comstock lode in Nevada, right in this area here, brought about $340 million worth of gold and silver. The Comstock lode was continuously mined from 1860 to 1890. Other strikes in most western states were drawing big population and eventually big mining industries as well, with former independent miners working for them. These fortunes would eventually help finance Civil War, or the Civil War, and railroads as well. And a lot of these mining towns would become permanent towns out west. As you can see on the map here, Salt Lake City was not originally a mining town, but it became one. Denver, Colorado became a major mining and urban center. Places like Tombstone and Silver City became very regular areas as well for mining. And the mining aspect, you can see Sutter's Mill right here, very close in proximity to San Francisco. Once again, why the San Francisco 49ers have their name. These became major areas in the American West. But of course, what everybody wants to talk about when they talk about the Old West is ranching in the golden age of the cowboy. Now, in reality, the cowboy life was not as glamorous as you saw in the previous slide. Cowboys typically didn't have shootouts all the time. Their day was pretty much wrapped into caring for cattle, working and practicing their lasso skills so that they could catch the cattle, branding, and a lot of handyman repairs. Fencing always needed to be mended somewhere, and there were always opportunities to practice the things you need to practice in order to be an effective cowboy. It wasn't necessarily like the movies. But if there was some relative excitement in the cowboy life, it was the long drive that cowboys would do going all the way from Texas to modern-day Kansas, where meatpacking businesses were. They would drive these cattle to slaughterhouses, and then the cattle would be slaughtered there and shipped out east. Cowboys would lead steer up to 600 miles to cow towns, as you can see some of the most famous cattle trails right here, eventually ending in places like Dodge City right here, Abilene, Kansas, and also Cheyenne. Once again, they'd get the cattle there, and then in these major slaughterhouses, the cattle would be butchered and then taken east in refrigerated train cars through Kansas City and Chicago. Steak became the meal of the day for the cowboy and the rancher, of course, because they'd get some of the benefits from butchering their own cattle. And I'm telling you right now, I don't have pictures of it, but if you ever saw an Old West steak, it is huge. It's like twice the size, if not 3 times the size, of a modern-day porterhouse. But the ranchers and cattlemen eventually found themselves in decline due to settlement by homesteaders who were fencing off what used to be free government grazing land used on long drives. Sheep herders were also getting into the mix. It was seen by the cattle ranchers, or they were seen by the cattle ranchers, as people who had invaded and now were letting their sheep graze on any remaining land that was left after the homesteaders had gotten done with it. Cattle ranchers couldn't afford to lose their livelihood, so this led to a series of cattle wars over the land between ranchers who were going against both the sheep herders and the farmers. In time, ranchers would simply fence off their land and learn to breed fewer animals that were bulkier and meatier than the ones they'd had before. Get more bang for their buck per cattle, I guess you'd say. They also started to unionize, forming the Stock Growers Association. So after a while, they did find ways to coexist with the homesteaders and the sheep herders that were out there. But that doesn't change the fact that the Old West was, in fact, wild, as evidenced by the Heldorados and the other towns of the Wild West that existed. These towns included all of the goods and services a miner or a rancher could possibly want. You had guns, you had saloons, and in the saloons there was whiskey at a bar, and there were cards at the table, and there were women upstairs. There were all sorts of ways that merchants would find to try to take the newly earned dollar of ranchers and miners that lived in these towns. And every time you have people that are living fairly desperately for their next dollar and throwing in some alcohol, you're going to have a series of episodes that could only be described as frontier justice or the law of the gun. In these particular scenarios, it wasn't necessarily that you had a courtroom. Your courtroom was often in the public eye. And be very careful that you don't steal from people out there. You could end up in a bad way if you're found liable of theft of money or theft of horse. Lawmen who were out there certainly had to deal with things much differently than lawmen in the East did. Again, usually settled by guns, like this guy, Wild Bill Hickok in Abilene, Kansas. He killed over 100 men in the line of duty, but he died in 1876 when one of those men snuck up behind him in a saloon while Wild Bill was playing cards and shot him in the back of the head. He was holding aces over eights at the time, and ever since then, aces over eights is known as the dead man's hand. Some other famous outlaws and lawmen of the time period included Billy the Kid of the Regulators. They made a movie about it called Young Guns a while back. That involves the Lincoln County Cattle War. The James Gang, led by Jesse James, famous for robbing banks and trains and stagecoaches. And Wyatt Earp, who was part of the shootout at the OK Corral. Earp was a lawman, and he held up justice with the assistance of his brother Morgan, his friend Doc Holliday, and his other brother Virgil. But people often questioned how severe that justice should have been. Despite the excitement that they provided, though, a lot of these towns ended up as ghost towns. Now, what is the life cycle of a ghost town? Well, it's really pretty simple. First of all, you've got to start with a source somewhere where no town even exists. That source might be gold or silver or great farming soil or grazing land. You started to hear towns out west being characterized as gold towns or mining towns or farming towns or cattle towns, cow towns. Once word got around that there was a source of some sort that could make you rich instantly or provide you with riches through ranching or whatever, people would be drawn to the area, followed by merchants. Now, the merchants were never the guys who did the shoveling. The merchants were guys who sold the shovels. I heard one guy on a TV show say it would cost me $90 to get a plot of land and buy a shovel and possibly find nothing. Or $90 would buy me 6 shovels that I could sell to people who were out there doing the mining. Merchants followed these guys and sold them things like dry goods and food and booze and everything they could in these little tent communities, often including things like, blue jeans. Levi's jeans were invented out there by Levi Strauss to give to miners or sell to miners who were looking for a fabric that wouldn't tear so much on the rock and the wood that they were working with by the river. Levi's jeans became famous that way. In any event, miners and ranchers were following them out there to provide them with goods and services. And those tent communities eventually turned into permanent towns with permanent buildings. As long as the source was there and doing well, there was a reason to build a permanent site to stay. But when that source ran out, everyone left, and very few people stuck around to tear the buildings down or get rid of the old wood or anything like that. People didn't want to stay and clean up after themselves, they just wanted to get out. And the result you have, of course, is a ghost town, which are a big part of the charm of the Old West in modern day times. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening.